Hello, this is another episode of Kitchen Pedagogy, and we're going to be talking about checking for understanding and 5 different ways to do it. One which I think is really easy to do and you can do nearly in every lesson at various stages is to summarise what's been happening so far. So for example, let's say you are reading a story. How do I know if the students have been following? How do I know if they've understood the main developments? If you have a routine which you use all the time, that the students have the habit that at the end of a section of a text, you might be asked to summarise. It means they're expecting to have to summarise whenever they're asked. So you build that into the general habits of the class. So you might stop and say, okay, that's interesting. What do you think's been happening so far? Abdi, summarise it for us. Now Abdi was expecting that he might be asked because everyone was expecting that they might be asked. It could be a maths explanation. You've just gone through a method and you've explained it point by point, and you then might say, okay, so Joanna, summarise for me, go through the main steps. And again, everyone was ready to answer that because that's what you do all the time. It could be you just explained a science demonstration on the front bench and they're gathered around and you get a student to summarise the explanation you've just given. A video you've just watched. A debate you've just had. Summarising is quite an important cognitive skill because you've got to generatively formulate a kind of a sense of the key ideas and express them in some kind of order. And if students do that regularly, they get better at that. But also it gets you a sense of the sorts of things they're picking out, the sorts of things they've missed out, and it gets you a good read. So that's just one student. You then might ask someone else for their summary if you think that's appropriate. But over the course of a lesson, you get lots of this sort of sense of summarising, and it helps to consolidate and gives you a good check for understanding. A second idea is just the very simple thing of repeating back to you what you've told students to do. It's a mistake which sometimes teachers make, which is just give instructions and then say, is everybody clear? Has everybody got that? And then some students have and some students haven't. But if you just have the habit of saying, okay, so that's the homework or that's the task, let me just check. John, repeat back to me, what do you think I've asked you to do? And John says, well, I think you've asked us to do this, this and this. And you go, okay, that's good. And Michaela, what do you think? What's your take? And she has to say, yeah, I agree with John. And sometimes there's differences. And if they're both giving you a sort of similar read, you think, great, okay, we seem to have got that. So even at the minimum, one student repeating back to the instructions can reveal a lot if they don't get it right. Another good one for getting cross-class accountability, which is a phrase I like, which is agree or disagree. So you build it into the routines that when we're talking, when someone's sharing an idea, it could be that you ask a student to whether they agree or disagree with the previous person, which means they have to listen to that person. But also it's checking their understanding of what other people have said. And I find this happens quite a lot in lessons, that a confident student will give a lovely full answer to something and the teacher just stops or just assumes that's been translated across the class into everyone else's head. And very often it isn't the case. So you could just say, did you hear what so-and-so said, or just what do you think they said? But a good way to frame that is to say, do you agree or disagree? Because that makes them think about the meaning of what's been said, not just hit whether they heard it. So how would you do that? You'd say, right, Mohammed's given us a really interesting explanation. So Safia, what do you think? Do you agree with Mohammed's take? And she has to say yes or no, and then you follow up with the reasons. That's a really good check for understanding about whether she's understood his point and then formulating her own answer. And again, it becomes one of the routines in the class. We do this all the time. Do you agree or disagree? And it's the students who are then talking know that someone else might be asked to agree or disagree. So they sort of then try to be a bit more persuasive. And it creates a culture. This is normal, this cross-class accountability. Anyone in any position, including the shyest, least confident-looking students, might be asked to participate by responding to what other people have said. A fourth idea is this trying to get students' thoughts out so that you can see what they're thinking before they go off to do something extensive, which then takes a longer time for you to find out whether they understood. So, for example, like a piece of writing. do a plan and talk it through. So thinking aloud as you plan, I mean, it can be a bit artificial to literally hear them verbalizing and you walking around, but you get them to jot down a plan and talk it through. So what are you going to do? What are you thinking you might write? What are you thinking you might include in your explanation? What are the key points you're going to put in your paragraph? And if students can articulate their thinking in that way, then you've got to check for whether they're on the right lines before they've gone off to do the task. So that can be very, very useful. And that can be done, say, in a pair share situation. So turn to your partner, share the main thoughts you're having about this process so it gets them a chance to rehearse it verbally, and then you sample the class to see the sorts of responses that you're getting. And then, right, now we're ready to do the task. And a final one, which is a bit like agree or disagree, is more teacher-led, which is explain or defend your position. And that's one of the specific things that Rosenshine references. And this can be quite a challenging type of check and quite a good probing question. Is someone might give an answer. So, for example, you might be talking about something in science like, will the metal paperclip float or sink when you put it on the surface of the water? And the student might say, it'll sink. And you have to say, you get them to explain it. Okay, so are you sure? Why? What if I told you I could make a paperclip float? Would you believe that? Or explain why you're certain it will sink. And what would be your reason? How come a heavy metal ship will float, but you're saying this paperclip will sink? So they have to think harder. It could be a position to do with a debate where you say, oh, that's interesting. I'm not entirely sure I'm convinced. Explain yourself again. Persuade me more that that's a good case. And the students have to just go further. So it's a kind of probing question, but it's checking their understanding in the detail. So they just don't remember stuff off by heart. They haven't just given you a stock answer. And you can sometimes say, well, would it happen in this case? Would it happen in that case? Is it always true? So it doesn't mean you need to have some good probing stems for your subject to offer the challenge. But it's a really good check for understanding that students don't just know stuff to say, da, 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 because that's what you always say. They have to be able to articulate it with a bit of a challenge, and that means they have to learn it in a deeper way. And then you can build the other strategies together. So someone has given that kind of defense, and then you invite someone in to see if they agree or disagree. So there's lots of ways of checking for understanding. They're all different, and you would thread them throughout the lesson. So in a sense, you're checking for understanding constantly in these different ways. And if the students know there are certain regular types, like, for example, summarising, like agree or disagree, then the habits form around that, and the students focus their attention more, they think more deeply, and you just get more from them.